First of all, the damn lappers out there. I don't know who the 99 car is or whatever, but...
It's Derek Cope. Hello YouTube and welcome back to another edition of 3 Wide. This week the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series is at Darlington Raceway for the Southern 500. Going into this weekend's race, one of the crown jewels of NASCAR. Many people were thinking this was going to be one of the great races and hoping it would live up to what we all think it could be. In the end, I think this was a good race. It had a little bit of everything. We had someone dominate, we had guys coming through the field, we had some big three roaring their head, and in the end we had someone who was hanging around in the top 10 all day end up winning the race and having his car work when it mattered the most at the end. And we got to stare at some great paint schemes. So now I'll get into my 3 takeaways for the Southern 500. Number 1, tires. Every time there's a race at Darlington, we know that tires are going to play a huge role because this track just eats tires for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. As we saw last year in the Southern 500, tires played a huge role when Martin Truex's tire went down, he ended up in the wall, and Denny Hamlin went by to get the win. And this race was pretty much no different, where tires played a huge role in this race. Whether you ran 3 laps, 30 laps, or 100 laps on your tires, the drivers were screaming to their crew chief to get a new set as soon as they could. We saw Alex Bowman have a tire problem, and we saw many other drivers have either loose wheel problems or have their tires wear out and have them go down on them. Going into the last stage, there was a debate between teams whether to do 2 stops or 3 stops on their tires, and it seems that 2 stops could have worked, but the cautions threw everyone out of the system, and it was just put the tires on as soon as the yellow came out and let's re-rack them and go forward again. And as we saw from this race, when there's tires that fall off drastically, it turns into a good race. It could even make races go from just average to good and good races to great. So now we'll see if NASCAR can just form their tires to have a lot of wear off to make racing better overall. Now on to number 2. Larson's domination comes up short. Going into this season for Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series, many people's championship pick to win the title was Kyle Larson. And so far this year, he has no wins, but for the most part this season, he's been the best running Chevy. And in this race in Darlington, Kyle Larson was just putting a whooping on the field where he led 284 laps. Kyle Larson was going to go for the 2-stop strategy in the last stage, but the cautions coming out just threw a wrench in his plans where he just pit every caution just like everyone else did. And this would come up to blow up in his face when on the last pit stop his crew didn't get the job done and he lost the race off of pit road to Brad Keselowski and would not get a good restart and would end up finishing in the 3rd position. So now with Larson coming up short again this season, after both Bristol races he had a really good car and didn't win, that great finish at Chicagoland where he just came up short to Kyle Busch, and then this race at Darlington. Will this hinder Kyle Larson or will this motivate him to get the job done in the playoffs? Because as we know, if Kyle Larson can just get to Homestead, he's more than likely going to be your champion in the Cup Series, as he'll run that high line better than anyone can imagine and he'll win the race. So now Larson just has to refocus and figure out a way where he can get to Homestead. So now on to number 3, the Penske party. This season so far for Team Penske, it's just been a blast season. Joey Logano's won a race earlier in the season at Talladega, and Brad Keselowski's run great in terms of points but hasn't been really in contention to win any races, and Ryan Blaney's gone cold in the second half of the season after he was running pretty well in the first half. But this weekend at Darlington, the Penske fortunes changed after they won the Xfinity race with Brad Keselowski on Saturday. They then came back on Sunday to win the Southern 500 with Brad Keselowski, with his teammate Joey Logano finishing 2nd, and Ryan Blaney sitting in the corner finishing in 15th, wondering how he can get up there with his teammates. Brad Keselowski was running pretty well, solidly in the top 10 all day during this race. But then during those last pit stops, his Penske pit crew, who was using some new choreography to make the pit stops go better, ended up getting him out before Kyle Larson, and the rest was history for Team Penske. So now we'll see if Penske can ride this wave of momentum into the playoffs where one of their drivers can maybe be one of the front 4 and be in that championship finale fight, because we know Roger Penske is going to try to pull out all the stops for next week's race in Indianapolis. So now we'll move on to look ahead to next week's race at Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400, which is the playoff cutoff race. Now into my 3 things to look ahead to. Number 1, will drivers go for playoff points or the overall win? As we've seen in many races earlier in the season, where track position played a huge role and tires were just a thing that you had to have on your car, some people had to make the choice. Do you want the playoff points and the stage points, or do you want to put yourself in position to win the race? Now we know if you're not locked into the playoffs, you're going to go for that win. But for the guys who are locked in, are they going to go for the 2 potential playoff points, knowing they'd probably be easier to get, or to go for the overall win to get those 5 bonus points? The people I'm really wondering about are the 2 guys who are just ahead of the cutoff of Alex Bowman, who's in 16th, and Jimmy Johnson, who's in 15th. Are you just going to go for broke and try for a win, or will they just try to get the stage points to just make their total go higher, knowing that it's going to take a miracle for someone to knock them out? Now on to number 2. Will the track be different with the month change from July to September. With NASCAR trying to fix the attendance problems at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for their 400-mile race, they've changed the date of this race from July, right before the second Pocono race, to being the playoff cutoff race and being in September. With the current forecast for the Sunday race in Indianapolis being 78, but there's a chance of rain, with the cooler temperatures, will this race be better or worse? For the sake of NASCAR and for the sake of the people who will be going to the race, I hope it helps the race be a better overall performance out of the Cup cars. But there's a part of me that thinks where there's more grip, the Cup cars have been worse. But with there being more grip in the track, that has me thinking that the Cup drivers will try some more risky maneuvers to pull off with more traction with these tires. But as we saw earlier in the year from the month change of Chicagoland moving it up to being in the heat of the summer, it produced a better race. So hopefully for Indianapolis' sake, the change to being in a cooler part of the year will produce better racing. But don't get your hopes that this is going to be like a Chicago version here in Indianapolis. It's still one grooved Indy, and we know how these races have been. I just hope with the cooler temperatures that the cars will be able to keep their runs off the turns to where they can keep the run going into the next part of the course and get past their driver, making this a better overall race with more passing. Now on to number 3. Any surprise winners to get into the playoffs? More than likely this race in Indianapolis is just going to be same old, and one of the drivers who've won this year or who've been running good are going to win this race. But we've seen in the history of Indy, there's been some surprise winners within the past 8 years. We had Casey Kane last year, survived the Indianapolis race where he won that wreckfest and got his way into the playoffs. And we go back to 2011 where Paul Menard on pit strategy ended up holding off Jeff Gordon to win his first and only career race to this point in his career. So now you got to think of who are some likely prospects to win in Indianapolis to maybe knock their way into the playoffs. You can think of Daniel Suarez. He was good at Pocono, and Pocono sometimes is compared to Indianapolis. Ryan Newman, he can do some strategy and maybe get his way up there and win the race. And a long shot of William Byron to break through and get his first career win. He was good at Pocono, and Pocono sometimes lends itself to being the same as Indianapolis for the stock cars. So maybe the Hendrick team can figure something out and get him into the playoffs. But if he gets into the playoffs, that's a problem now, because that would knock out either Jimmy Johnson or Alex Bowman. So I don't know if Hendrick's going to go all in to get Willie B to the playoffs. So I'll do it for this week's edition of 3 Wide. Leave your thoughts about the Southern 500 in the comment section below, as well as what you think is going to happen in Indianapolis. If you like the video, leave a like. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, hit the subscribe button. And if anyone's looking for a fantasy football league, there's a link in the description below to join the league. And as always, thanks for watching.